So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very sorry about the delay. We've been having some Zoom glitch, the usual Zoom and technologies glitch. One of our speakers is still trying to join us. So as we begin the conversation, you might see new faces here. But thank you very much for joining us to this Nalafem Wednesday webinar. And our conversation today is on ending gender discrimination. And so we will be joined by Chikondi, by Elsie, and by Mapaseka, who's here representing the Southern African Youth Forum. And today the conversation is about ending gender discrimination, and more specifically, equitable access to land and ownership for young women in Africa. And perhaps, the impossibility of moving towards gender equality without it. So the Nala Feminist Collective is a Pan-African group of 17 powerful feminists who are advocating for the meaningful mainstreaming and implementation of the manifesto's 10 demands. And some of you may still wonder, what is the manifesto? The manifesto is a political and feminist document that's been co-created with 1,500 youth from across the continent, more specifically 44 countries, and with 30 youth organizations. And it really outlines African women's demands across generation. And I think this conversation today is very timely. And I'm so happy and delighted to say that this webinar is co-organized with the Southern Africa Youth Forum, and definitely, as I said, speaking on demand 3 of the manifesto, which is ending gender discrimination. So I'm really delighted to be joined by Elsie Masava and Chikondi Chavbuta, and also Wadzanai Manyore, who will be joining us soon. And we will be hearing from them very shortly. Our speakers are from Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. And I think this allows us not only to have a context-based conversation, but also an opportunity for all of us to understand the patterns and challenges, and also ways forward within the African context. So to everyone joining us today, thank you once again. And please do tell us where you're calling from, because we'd love to know. And this will be a very participatory conversation. So feel free to send your questions throughout the conversation, throughout the webinar. Because we really want to hear about your experiences and also views on this very pertinent topic. So without further ado, and before we dive into the conversation, I would like to invite my colleague from the Southern Africa Youth Forum, Mapaseka Vahama, to provide her opening remarks. Mapaseka, feel free to turn on your camera. We'd love to see you and to hear from you.
Hello. Thank you everyone and from the organizers for the invitation. Dear colleagues, our esteemed panelists, representatives of our partner Nalafem, SAI of SADC, representatives, SADC Youth, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of our esteemed panelists, Southern Africa Youth Forum, SAI of SADC, and our partner Nalafem, to welcome you all to this webinar. Ending gender discrimination was part of our second SADC Youth Forum, which was summarized in a declaration. The forum was held in 2020, where more than 2,000 young people and stakeholders gathered to deliberate on various themes. Ending gender discrimination is also demand 2 of the Africa Young Women Beijing 25 Manifesto. This webinar, being hosted by Nalafem and SAI of SADC, is premised on the thematic focus of ending gender discrimination, particularly the need for equitable access to land ownership, ensuring economic independence and personal empowerment. There are various barriers that impede young women's fair access to ownership of land and natural resources. This meeting is a platform to explore and co-create solutions to shape policies, practices, and legislations. We must also highlight that the pursuit to attain gender equality is not the responsibility of women alone, but should be a collaborative effort between men and women. It's not women against the world fighting for their rights or a battle of the genders. We are adamant with the quest to promote women's rights, to bridge the existing gaps to foster sustainable development. Empowering a woman is empowering a nation. Failure to resolve land conflicts prolongs social tension, exacerbates poverty, which compromises women's health and triggers gender-based violence in cases where women have to stay in unhealthy relationships just to have food on the table. With that said, we are proud to be joined by experts and a rich panel. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate the quest towards gender justice and equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mapasa and Mapasikan. I think we're very delighted to have the Southern Africa Youth Forum on board and for solidarities that really strengthen Nala's advocacy and vision to create in further spaces for young African women, not only as we prepare for the Generation Equality Forum happening at the end of this month in Paris, but also beyond, and to actually make these co-created spaces as the status quo, to say that African young women can no longer be marginalized and pushed to the periphery. So to everyone joining us today, thank you so much. And please remember to send out your questions throughout the chat or the Q&A, but also beyond questions, please do share your thoughts, because as I said, this is really a participatory space. So I would like to first start with Chikondi. I've been very excited to engage with you, and I think you bring on board so many radical thoughts based on your experience and based on the learnings that you're about to share with us today. And I think the first question that I have is about legislations and customary laws. So could you please perhaps elaborate on, the legislations and customary laws in the context which you're familiar with that have forcibly been challenging to dismantle in order to favor women's access to only land? And please do introduce yourself to the attendees and to us.
Thank you very much, Amina, for having me. And it's a great honor to join this distinguished panel and talk about something that is really personal and also links to all our work that we do when it comes to food security. So I am Chikondi Chavbuta. I am the Regional Advocacy Advisor for CARE International. I'm based out of Lilongwe, Malawi. And I have been working on women's rights, women's land rights issues for over a decade now, I think. And so glad to share some of the insights that we've experienced throughout the work, and also hear from the distinguished panelists here on the way forward as we move towards Generation Equality Forum. So for starters, there has been a lot of research done on women's land rights, especially in our context of Southern Africa. And the countries have been quite progressive in bringing in laws that speak to women's rights, women's recognition of their rights to land as a human right. And this has been manifested in several countries in Southern Africa. We still have other countries that yet to have policies and laws in place that favor women, but generally the practice on the ground statutory, the laws seem to favor women, the constitutions favor women. But this is not the same what you find in practice, because customary law and also personal law, family practices, they are the ones that determine women's access to land. And in some contexts, these constitutions or laws that are there as land laws would state that women have access to land, young women would have access to land, but they do not go down to sort of put affirmative action in ensuring that young women actually do have access to land or control land, even ownership. So we know that a lot of women, young women, are living in rural areas. The trajectory is changing over time, but there are so many socioeconomic obstacles that are in place and at the center stage. For example, when a young woman is about to obtain a title deed, that's a tall order for a young woman in Africa to do, because one, you need to get permission either from your husband or from your parents. This could even be written down in law, or it could even be just customary law. And in most cases, the application of the customary law is quite patriarchal. There are some pockets where the system has a matrilineal side, but this is a smaller percentage compared to the areas within the region that have more patriarchal laws determining how women access land. There are land committees that are in place, sort of try to balance the issue of access and control ownership of land, but the representation in those committees is also to be questioned, because traditional values sort of place women's voice kind of difficult for them, and it makes it harder for them to speak even within these committees. So essentially, you still find men and patriarchal systems determining issues of land ownership and land access in some cases. There is clearly a discrimination on access to land because of socio-economic barriers, social norms and practices that still do not recognize young women as an entity that could make decisions on their own when it comes to issues of land and making decisions on livelihoods for themselves. I'll just start there and leave it for others as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chikondi. And I think you're right. These patriarchal boundaries are choking us as young women, not only in Southern Africa, but in other parts of the continent as well. And I think we really cannot speak about land ownership without income inequalities. And I think the demand for economic justice is also tied to ending these types of gender discrimination, which is often rooted in also economic policies that undermine women's contribution to the landscape of agriculture, agribusiness, and food security, and also climate change, in preventing climate change as well, which I would love to ask you about in a few. So I would like to turn to Elsie and to hear from you. You know, African women's demands continue to be silenced by not only the systems which Chikondi have mentioned, the patriarchal systems and the traditional quote unquote values, and these are, you know, practiced by families and by relatives. And, you know, land, as we know, is a primary resource, you know, in Marxist terms, the fundamental mean of production. And we're seeing, you know, layers upon layers. Gender and racial discrimination go hand in hand. So, Elsie, perhaps I would like to ask you a simple question. What can we as young African women do to dismantle the system, to move forward and to change the status quo?
Thank you so much, Amina. I'm glad to be joining you all from Nairobi. As Chikondi was speaking, I just realized that young women face a double dilemma, that they are young and they are female. And that already places them in a place of disadvantage, particularly in an environment where we see progress and change and challenge being brought about by men mostly. So just to inform you of what we have as a background, apologies for the noise, I'm trying to get that done. Yeah. So just what we see is that globally, women still own less land. This is from the statistics that we have in place. They still own less land and have less secure rights than men, with 20% having ownership to the world's land, being part of world's land holders. And in Kenya, we see statistics done, taken in a 2021 report, indicating that the makeup of this labor force of young women in the agricultural labor force is 75%, where they're supporting 80% of food production and benefiting only from 7% of agricultural extension services. What does that mean? that as much as we may be engaging in these different spaces, we do not have ownership and access. And this then continues to challenge our economic empowerment as we proceed. So it actually basically translates to a lack of access to more finance, to invest in modern technology. It also tells us that we have limited opportunities for membership to cooperatives and therefore access services that would otherwise be available for large-scale farmers, and also access to reliable markets for market produce. So in this predominantly patriarchal society, we're not seeing opportunities for progress for these young women. And therefore, that means that we will need to make some changes. And the changes will start off with the legal frameworks that we have in place. So the first step is to address the legal framework gaps. You will note with concern that data is not disaggregated, and data particularly on young women is not even at one point available because we are lumped into different groups and therefore we're not able to be catered for specifically. So first and foremost, as young women, to move the system forward, we need to organize and compel governments to address these critical legal framework gaps. And then the second aspect would be to now adopt a multi-tier approach. What do we mean by that? We've just noticed that sometimes the legal aspects would actually be beneficial, but the challenge then happens to be at that community level. The challenge will be at that country level. The challenge would be when you're at the family level. That means then our approach must be diverse, calling for meaningful partnership in actually the implementation of a comprehensive, gender-sensitive, and a very participatory national land policy review, so that young women can actually be part and parcel of the decision-making processes. Thirdly, we need to capacitate young women grassroots formations. Over time, we've seen overwhelming evidence of community organizing, transforming situations, transforming and changing cultural norms. So if they are capacitated to understand what are their legal rights, how do this merge with their community expectations, and how can we make that transformation? If we have this capacity, these young women capacitated, then transformation will be actually realized. Finally, as I've mentioned heavily, is the aspect of generating timely and quality data on young women's land rights issues, while actually adopting an intersectional approach that will actually cover the complexities of young women. We are at a time where the space of being a young woman grapples with two different generations, thinking that there is a dimension or a way of life that we should have. But at this point, it is important for us to note that young women's experiences with land ownership should be documented because they are unique from the complexities that other generations faced and therefore have now advanced needs. But we actually need to design a more progressive and more inclusive approach towards that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elsie. I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi dropped for a few seconds, but I think what you've provided us with is clearly an outline and literally a concrete roadmap for how to go about it. And I hope that everyone joining us today has taken notes of that and can continue advocating for these. And I think we would love to hear from Wadzanai, who's joined us now. I'm very sorry about the glitch you've had with Zoom. You should be able to turn your camera on, and I think we would love to hear from you in terms of language. I think it's also a conversation about etymologies and about how we go about framing things. And in the basics of language, the word farmer is often considered as gender neutral, right? Yet African women as Elsie have said, and as Chikondi have also emphasized, make a large and significant workforce in agriculture, not only in the southern region, but in every corner of the continent. So I think from your experience as a farmer and in the agribusiness industry, how has women's contributions been silenced? If you could give us a few examples of that. And what are the kind of intersecting or the existing intersections that you've noticed, but the existing intersections that exist with land ownership. Wadzanai, the floor is yours, and also please feel free to introduce yourself and your work. I think you are muted, sorry. Yeah.
Yes, there I go. Thank you so much, guys, for having me today. I am deeply humbled to be a part of this initiative. And I'm very happy that we guys as women are talking about these issues, because these are some of the issues that draw us back as women in agriculture. So my name is Wadzanai Manyore. I am a television producer presenter for a program called Agribusiness, which is aired on our national television here in Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe Television. And I also participate in agriculture. I'm a full-time farmer. Most of my income comes from farming. And I am very happy that this discussion is a part of what I do, is centered on some of the things that I do. So as we get into our discussion, thank you once again for the questions that we have highlighted here. I understand that you are looking to have me answer on my experience as a farmer in the agribusiness industry, women's contributions. So on all of this, I am going to be talking based on my experiences, firstly, as a farmer, and secondly, as a television producer, because my program is centered on agricultural activities in Zimbabwe. From my experience as a farmer initially, I would say the ground is not even. The ground is not level enough to accommodate women fully. Though there are initiatives, though there are programs that are being availed for us farmers to uptake, but it is just not even. Firstly, I would say it has to do with the mindset. Women, there has to be a paradigm shift. We have to now understand that it is possible for us to partake in agricultural activities. How do we do that? We have to take advantage of the programs that are being availed. We have non-governmental organizations, those that come with resources, with capital, which seek to equip the farmers, the female farmers. We also have the government, our government, it is also playing a role in that. We also have churches, different organizations, they're encouraging us farmers. They're coming up with capital, with projects. For example, we do have, when we talk of capital, there are projects to do certainly with, for example, broiler chickens production, poultry production, piggery production, where one can get piglets and feed to get into farming. So from what I have gathered as a female farmer, of course, the ground might not be even, but it's possible. It needs determination, educate yourself. Personally, to get into agriculture, for me, I did experience challenges, but my flagship was my education. I did study agriculture from a Bachelor's of Science degree. I have a Master's of Science in Agribusiness. I also have a Master's in Business Administration. So for me, it was a bit easy compared to my other female counterparts, because I had a stepping stone. I know what I was doing. I was able to interpret a project and see whether is it sustainable, is it viable, should I take it, should I leave it? So for me, it was a bit easier because I did have the knowledge and I also had the understanding. And like some of the female farmers out there, the desire is there. They do want to take care of their families. They do want to take care of their medical bills. They want to contribute to the income of their families and help probably their male counterparts. But when it comes to knowledge, there is still a gap. One doesn't know exactly what to do when it comes to, say, piggery production. They don't know exactly how to take care of the pigs, and they might end up losing their resources, losing the capital that they had in the form of the pigs themselves that they would have been given probably by the government or an NGO. They end up losing those pigs, high mortality rates in chickens. When it comes to issues such as tobacco production, you would find that some people, some farmers end up being shortchanged by even their employees because they do not understand what it takes to sustain such a project. You can be told, for example, for me to do this, I need $100. And yet it's for $2 or it's for $1. But because you do not have the hands-on experience, you do not have hands-on knowledge, you end up paying $100 for something that is for $1. So when it comes to knowledge, it is very important. It is very critical for our farmers to understand this. Moving right along, I would like to talk about financial literacy and its importance when it comes to farming. As farmers, as female farmers, there are challenges when it comes to interpreting cash flows, financial records. It's difficult for a farmer, for example, to understand that I'm going to approach a bank, a financial institution. I want a loan. I need a loan so that I can sustain my tobacco production for maybe 2 hectares or 5 hectares. That farmer might not even be knowledgeable as to the amount of fuel in the form of diesel that is required for them to plow their field. They don't even know, for example, how much do I need for my labor, the labor costs. Because for you to calculate labor, you have to understand the kind of labor that will be taking place. For example, weeding, chemical application, reaping, harvesting. All those are different forms of activities that have to be paid accordingly. You cannot pay a laborer who's been weeding the same amount as someone who's been harvesting. There are different types of activities, and it becomes difficult for that farmer to put that in writing, to translate that in writing and come up with a project proposal that is viable, that will make her a good candidate, or that will make the bank consider her for a loan. It's difficult because that person does not have skills that allow her to interpret a financial record or financial literacy appropriately. So financial literacy is one key fundamental that I've discovered in the agricultural fraternity, aligning it to female farmers. We also have issues surrounding religion. We also have issues, socioeconomic challenges, whereby women, we are not, for example, to a greater extent, we are not, it's not, I wouldn't say allowed, but it's sort of like unacceptable for a woman to have, our male counterparts find it shocking. They find it intimidating if you are running a viable entity. So at the end of the day, as women, we end up sort of like dimming our light. We have to slow down. We have to reduce what we are doing or our activities. We have to shy away from certain things. We can do them, but because we want to be accepted by the society, we don't want to be seen as challenging. We don't want to be seen as if we are unable to be submissive, because they associate that form of success or that form of being big successful. They're associated with being stubborn or arrogant as women. They say, as a woman, how can she own 100 cattle? How can she own 10 tractors? How is it possible? So you end up being silenced, to answer your question. But it's not all bad. There are situations where farmers are excelling as well, female farmers. I would like to comment on food processing. I would like to comment on processing, the value chain. If you look at the agricultural value chain, from my research, from my Masters of Science in Agribusiness, I looked at the value chain from 5 pillars. I looked at it from the initial pillar being research. Every agricultural activity or project is centered. First, you do a green revolution, which is research. We move on to production, you produce. We move on to processing. We move on to marketing. Then finally, there is consumption, the consumers. So you would find that most of farmers, the farmers that I interact with here in Zimbabwe, in the various regions of our country, they are taking comfort in processing. They've managed to establish, for example, restaurants whereby if she produces the potatoes, she does have a fast food takeaway where she, cooks the fries, the French fries. If she's producing broiler chickens, you would find that she has a restaurant, or she's packaging her broiler chickens. She slaughters them. She sells them to boarding schools. So you would find that when it comes to processing and marketing, those pillars in the value chain, they have been a bit easier for our fellow female farmers to undertake. They also are getting into peanut butter production. They go there in the communal lands and they purchase, for example, a lot of groundnuts. Even if they don't produce groundnuts, they go and purchase groundnuts. They process them and they come up with peanut butter. We also have farmers getting into cooking oil production. The sunflowers that our farmers produce here in Zimbabwe, they are consolidating themselves. They are forming syndicates. They are forming cooperatives whereby they purchase that sunflower in huge quantities, in huge amounts, and they go and create and make sunflower oil. So you would find that when it comes to the agricultural value chain, when it comes to agribusiness, most female farmers are finding comfort in processing and in marketing. They are, for example, sweet potatoes. They are making sweet potato crisps. They are packaging them. The only challenge that I've discovered so far is with standardization. Because for your product to get into the supermarkets, it becomes very difficult you have to be considered by the Standard Association, whereby they say, we have come to your place where you're doing your production, your processing, it is good, it is healthy enough. This product can go into the shelves of a supermarket. That is one area where most of the female farmers are complaining and are having challenges with. They are saying our peanut butter is not making it into the supermarkets. It is not making it into certain operations, or let's say schools. They might find it difficult to purchase peanut butter from Mrs. So and so because they say, your product is not properly standardized, or we don't know, we cannot trace it. So it is being a challenge for them. And also when it comes to
sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to bring in back our speakers and have the conversation with them, because I saw that Chikondi was nodding her head for some of what you said, and I would just like to ask her and Elsie if there's anything they would like to speak about, because I think all you three bring so much valuable insights from the different experiences that you're part of. So I think Wadzanai, you're speaking about the agricultural space and what the challenges that women are facing beyond land acquisition, beyond land ownership. And Elsie was really giving us sort of an outline of what is happening in a Kenyan context in which women's access to land is completely challenged. But I think, I would love to hear what Chikondi has to say about some of what you've mentioned. If Chikondi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I did resonate with what Wadzanai was saying. Being also a small scale farmer myself in this part of the continent, I do agree with some of the obstacles that are being met by women, and especially a young woman farmer, because there is I think one thing that we need to emphasize is there's no one size that fits all, and the contexts are different, and they determine the types of rights and the types of opportunities that are availed to each of young women across the continent. But I think it was mentioned briefly by Elsie that we need to make sure that we have gender sensitive legislation, whether it be in agricultural policies, land policies, marketing. It is a challenge for a young woman to access the regional market, to even sell beyond her village. You're talking of vendors and other big stakeholders that she has to compete with on the market, and she has to also compete with even to access land. Now, even with climate change coming in, that is like a double-edged sword for women, young women in Africa, because as you're dealing with the impacts of climate change, obviously your land productivity is impacted by the impacts, whether it be flooding, whether it be cyclones that coming in so frequent now. So the land parcel that we are allocated, even as at community level, it is meeting all these challenges, and it is probably making it so, it is a barrier for you to compete with anyone at all levels, whether it be at marketing, productivity. So there are these challenges, and they do boil down also to how norms, Wadzanai mentioned this, issues of norms and practices that are there and are impacting women's, and especially young women's access. You can imagine for a young woman to even have the space to talk about her right to land. It's a tall order. Women farmers themselves are facing a lot of challenges from land, from climate impacts, and also now the issues of new pests that are coming into the continent due to the climatic changes. It is a barrier for young women, but I'm glad that Wadzanai also brought up the opportunities that are there that could be taken up, but we should be mindful, and we should really be sensitive to the equity aspect, because as much as these opportunities would be there, that we need to take it a step further to ensure that it is quite inclusive. Young women are able to access, are able to own, and are able to be an equal player in this agriculture cycle. I just wanted to bring in that aspect. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chikondi. And I think both you, Wadzanai and Elsie, bring really important points in terms of equitable access to land ownership is also about ensuring economic independence and personal empowerment. And Elsie, is there anything you'd like to add before we head to the Q&A? There's a question that is specifically related to this point that I would like us to dive into.
Yeah, just to add, as I reflected on what was being mentioned, we realized that we probably don't have even the platforms to hold these discussions with young women, or if they are available, we are not aware of, or we are not taken as equal partners, or if, I mean, the challenges are almost outweighing the opportunities. So I think it's time, even with regards to what Nalafem is doing, it's very progressive. We are demanding that this space must be allocated, and this space must be meaningful to engage with those that will be transformative in our approach towards access, use, and also control over land. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Elsie. And exactly, I think it's really timely to have these conversations and to hold such spaces, but also to create them. I think if you've joined this conversation today, whether as a panelist or as a participant, I think you should take it on you as well, since you're interested in the topic, to create spaces where you could bring people at a policy level and at the grassroots and to have these conversations. And because the demand on equitable access to land and ownership of young women falls under a sub-demand of the manifesto, which is ending gender discrimination, it's definitely timely not only to speak about it,
I think we lost Amina on the network.
Okay.
Mapaseka, are you online?
I am. I am, even though it says my connection is unstable.
I'm so sorry. This has never happened before, but glad you're still here. My apologies. Apologies to the participants as well. Yeah, so I was just trying to amplify that what Nala is doing is to bring the Africa Young Women Beijing Plus 25 manifesto onto spaces where decision makers and policy makers are there, so as to ensure that African member states will be held accountable for responding to African women's demands and not pushing them to the periphery anymore. And I think there was a question on the chat that spoke to what you were saying, Wadzanai, in terms of education and personal development, moving beyond the formal spaces that exist to gain that education. My chat has disappeared, but I think you should be able to see the question. It was in regards to how can African young women get access to that education without necessarily waiting for the government to provide it if they would like to gain knowledge about how to go around farming, and also how to request access to land rights.
Okay. Sorry, I missed part of your question. I'm sorry, I missed a part of it. I was having a glitch.
There was a question around how can African young women access education or access learning materials that are not provided by the government in the instances in which these will be late to come or might never come from the government. So how can we learn about agriculture and land rights without necessarily going to school or getting certificates for it? And Elsie, Chikondi, please feel free to respond to this question as well.
Okay, should I go ahead? Okay. Yes, that is a very pertinent question, and thank you so much for raising it up to our participants. When it comes to issues surrounding access to education, I am very excited and I'm very happy to mention that we now live in a global village whereby we have the internet. Everything is now on the internet. If you like to look at the positives that come with the internet, if you go on the internet, you want to look about issues to, even if you want to get into piggery production, if you go on the internet, if you Google it, you should be able to come to come across that kind of information. So I would encourage my fellow farmers to have a good relationship with the internet for starters. Secondly, I would like to talk about our social groups as individual. You would find that, for example, if you go to church, you would talk about things of church, things from the church. If you also try and interact with farmers, you can pick a thing or two. Here in Zimbabwe, and I'm sure in most of African countries, we are always advocating for field days, whereby we create days whereby farmers interact. We go to so and so's farm, we go there, we interact, we see what he's doing or what she's doing. So it's also learning through observation. Don't be left out in some of these initiatives or in some of these programs. For example, we have this platform whereby we advertise. From my side, I tried and advertised to my fellow farmers in certain WhatsApp groups on Twitter, on Facebook. I tried to advertise to have some of our farmers, some of our female farmers who are lacking knowledge in agriculture to come onto this platform so that they can learn a thing or two. So when it comes to social networks, I encourage most of our female farmers, those that want to get into farming, to be able to participate, to be able to join this kind of gatherings. There is a lot of information. Some of the information that I use in my day-to-day practices on the piece of land that I am at is not what I learned at university. It comes through observation. I attend a lot of field days. I visit farmers just to see, how are your goats? How are your chickens? What have you been giving them in this winter season? How have you been managing? So when it comes to learning through observation, it's very important. We also have short courses. If you go online, there are short courses that you can get into, you learn, and you're awarded a certificate afterwards. So those are some of the things that I can come and think of that I've just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Wadzanai. Elsie, Chikondi?
Yeah, thank you. Wadzanai brings in a point that I also wanted to share, that young women are already organizing. Young women farmers in the communities, they are organizing. And it is now, I think, upon governments and other stakeholders to recognize these groupings and reach out to them. But also, I think they are there. It's just a matter of access. How are they able to access? Depending on the type of, where you are on the continent, there are issues of infrastructure that would come to play in terms of accessing some of these legal rights or other rights that come with farming. So we need to take it upon ourselves to really bring these groupings to be recognized, and also for them to be able to take on board some of the messaging when we are talking about awareness raising and the like when it comes to farming, land rights, but also how to dismantle some of these social norms, public norms that impede their progress in agriculture. So as groupings, they're there. It is just a matter of recognizing them, encouraging them, but also where they have access to technology, they should be able to take up some of these spaces as groupings. There's more that we could do as young women working in groupings from the small circles across the continent. Thank you.
Yeah, just to chip in, the question actually speaks to financial aid in terms of building their capacity, and that brings us to the understanding that probably she's a small scale or smallholder farmer. That means that she's not able to access quite a number of opportunities. That's why what Chikondi brings on board is the young women organizing. If we're able to effectively organize at community level, then you can be able to access more resources. So it's not a matter of the tracts of land that you have, but it's a matter of the skills and capabilities of being able to organize well and therefore access opportunities that would rather not be available to you as an individual, but be available to you as probably a small young women's cooperative that is. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elsie. Thank you, Chikondi, and thank you, Wadzanai. I really felt like it's not that I felt, I think it's a fact. I am in the presence of three powerful African powerhouses, and I am so humbled and honored to have listened to you today. And I think a lot of the participants in this webinar can join me as well. Thank you so much to Mapaseka for having listened as well. And I know you've shared some tips for the participants as well in terms of how to sort of enlarge your knowledge toolbox when it comes to agriculture, but also community organizing is really look for those free online courses and look for those workshops and take part of them, and look for the women who are organizing and listen to their challenges, and also try and support with local solutions. but also amplify what they're going through with your local politicians. And let's keep disrupting the space, really. Because when we speak about equitable access to land ownership, I think we're also referring to economic independence and personal empowerment. And I think African young women make a stand against the gender discriminatory laws and customs which we've mentioned today, especially those that are regulating inheritance and those which impede the fair access to ownership of land and natural resources. And I think within it, equitable and affordable access to goods, public services, and opportunities for rural young women, for young women with disabilities, young women seeking asylum, young women refugees and displaced, and young women migrants as well, because this is not an issue that only affects one specific type of monolithic women experience. I think it's quite intersectional, and it's prevalent across the board. So thank you for having joined us today. Thank you to the Southern Africa Youth Forum for coordinating and for liaising. Special thanks to Mishek, McDonald, and Mapaseka. And I think this is only the beginning of a conversation that at the Nala Feminist Collective we're trying to have, not only with activists such as yourself who are doing grassroots work, but also at a policy level, and to actually bridge between policy and grassroots spaces. So the Nala Council is made of 17 powerful feminists from across the continent. Some are within the policy space, some are activists, some are in the arts. So we have former Minister of Trade of Botswana, Bogolo Kenewendo, former AU Youth Envoy A.A. Chebi, Yasmin Abdelmajid, who's a writer from Sudan, Emma Theophilus from Namibia, and so on and so forth. And I think we really want to keep engaging in these conversations. So we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. And I think especially for this conversation on equitable land access, I would like to invite you to continue the conversation online. So feel free to start a Twitter thread. And I think Chikondi, Elsie, and Wadzanai are also ready to keep having the conversation with you on Twitter. So we can take it further. I wish this webinar was longer, but unfortunately it's only 1 hour. And I think as we move towards the Generation Equality Forum happening in Paris, we would love to gain support with the Africa Young Women Beijing Manifesto, which is the document that outlines these 10 demands, notably ending gender discrimination. So I will share the link on the chat, and I would like to invite you to read it and to get an understanding and get familiar with it. You'll find that it speaks to you, that it speaks to the demands of our generation as African young women, regardless of where we are in the continent. But I think the challenges are quite cross similar. And yeah, I think there's an exciting road ahead of us. And yeah, please make sure not to miss any updates on our social media, Facebook and Twitter. And once again, make sure to read and sign the manifesto. Signing it means that you've endorsed the demands and that you agree on the solutions. And thank you once again to my guests. Thank you, Chikondi. Thank you, Wadzanai. Thank you, Elsie. Thank you, Mapaseka. Thank you to Sayov. I was so delighted to host you today, and I hope we can engage further in the future. This is only the beginning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.